And it's recording.
Okay, hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Aakash Chowkase. Dr. Chowkase is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of California's Greater Good Science Center, where he leads initiatives to bridge differences across diverse backgrounds and promote kindness in schools. His research and programming focus on nurturing empathy, compassion, and pro-social behavior in adolescents and youth, helping the next generation expand their circle of concern and foster a more inclusive society. Dr. Chowkase holds a PhD in educational psychology from Purdue University. He's developed educational interventions that have reached hundreds of students and educators across the United States and India. Dr. Chowkase is also the co-founder, and I don't know if I can't pronounce this correctly. You have to help me, Aakash. Jana Prabodini. Did I really butcher that?
No, yeah, Jnana Prabodhini.
Okay, you did it much better than I could. A US-based nonprofit dedicated to creating sustainable change in education, women's empowerment, and rural development in India. Please welcome Dr. Aakash Chowkase.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess it's my turn to start talking now.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Wallace, for this heartfelt invitation. I am just so excited to be here. I wish I could be there in person. That was my preference, but unfortunately, I'm moving in the next 9 odd days to the East Coast, starting a new position. So here I am with multiple boxes behind me waiting for packing, and the house is a mess right now. So bear with me as I take you on this journey of research on compassion and the greater good and concern for others that I have initiated with my doctoral research and have continued to engage with it. I hope to present 2 studies, one from psychometrics, which is a branch of psychology that deals with the measurement stuff. How do we measure some things? And the second study is an intervention study where I'll take off my psychologist hat and put on my education hat, the educator hat, and then talk about intervention and how I went about studying an intervention I developed with teachers. So I hope to not bore you with a lot of statistics and jargon and stuff like that. But my goal is to present a coherent story of a topic that's, I think, a very important topic for recent times and has always been an important topic for the humankind. Uh, let's begin this journey. I'm so grateful. So I would like to start with the acknowledgement that I feel extremely grateful to be here in this esteemed audience and students out there. I hear you, I see you. I've recently been a student, so I understand how it is like to come to a session which probably has no direct connection to your own work, but I will try and make it very relevant for you. I understand there is a mixed bag of people in the room. I think there are philosophers, there are psychologists, and maybe even other people. I wish I could ask you what your majors were and what you were most interested in studying, but I'll start with the talk anyway. I here represent the Greater Good Science Center. How many of you, a quick show of hands, how many of you have heard about the Greater Good Science Center? And you'll have to really wave your hands because you're too far and I have a very small screen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can very clearly.
We only had one hand up, just going to let you know.
Oh, one person. Okay,
Yeah, but it's a psychologist too, so not a student.
That makes sense. The Greater Good Science Center is based at UC Berkeley, and the center studies the psychology, sociology, and the neuroscience of well-being, broadly construed, the science of a meaningful life. So we focus on areas such as compassion, empathy, bridging differences. It's not just the individual health, but also the community health. It's not the individual, it's not just about the individual being, but about the collective well-being, which is what distinguishes the Greater Good Science Center from some of the other organizations in this space. The most popular thing about this 25-year-old organization is the Greater Good magazine, which reaches about 500,000 people a year. They have a huge footfall. And the Science of Happiness podcast is one of the most popular podcasts in the psychology area in the US and also globally. So if you are into podcasts, you might want to tune into the Science of Happiness. And then there are also free EDX courses about leadership and about bridging differences. How can we tackle the big issue of polarization by bridging differences, by bridging divides across lines of racial, economic, and political differences. With that, I want to talk about concern for others. And I'll keep using the word concern for others instead of compassion for reasons I'll talk about in my first study. So broadly, my topic today is divided into three parts: the concept, the measurement, and the development. So what does concern for others mean, and why is it even important? This is the kind of work I've done very recently. Uh, so let me put on my education hat and talk about broad issues. Like we are in a university setup. We are so focused on doing the assignments right. We're focused on getting the argument right? Being precise and correct. And all of this is very cognitive in nature. But how many times and in how many lectures and in how many assignments and how many educational processes do we really talk about concern for others? In how many sessions do we talk about big issues like climate change and pollution and uh, child mortality and obesity and violence on women and children and minorities and the heinous war crimes and all the stupidity that's going around in the world in the name of religion and politics and faith and all of that? Sometimes I feel our education is so separated from the realities around us that we need processes to bring our attention back to why are we even getting this education? What is the use of this education? And why and where should we apply the things we are learning? It's not just about me. It's not just about finding a good job. I was in the Sonoma County 2 days ago on Saturday. Such a beautiful county. And I wish I had enough money to buy a house in your beautiful county, right? But that's all self-centric. What about other-centric? Are there other-centric models of education? That's the question I started thinking about. Look at these graphs, changes in empathy over years. This was done in 2011, 34% decrease in college students' empathic concern. 34% decrease. That's a huge decrease. And it's a huge study of American college students. Empathic concern, which is very close to compassion conceptually, 48% decrease over a period of 30 years. Let's sit with this discomfort for a moment. About 40 to 50% decrease in our empathy over years. Also, what else has decreased over time in the last 30 years? Moral reasoning, concern for others, trust in others, intent to donate to charity, helping behavior, civic engagement, social connectedness, use of communal words and phrases. The use of we has decreased. Use of the word self-control has decreased. Use of first-person plural nouns, we and us, in books has decreased. Use of other focused words in songs, popular songs, has decreased. The focus on intrinsic life goals has decreased. And thankfully, bullying has decreased. Now, I want to take a look at what has increased over time. It's not a good news, sorry. Narcissism has increased. Value of leisure, and extrinsic rewards as what you desire in a job has increased. Extrinsic life goals have increased. Individualistic words and phrases, online harassment, use of first person singular and second person pronouns, use of self-focused words, antisocial words and phrases in songs, all of them have increased. One good thing, tolerance for others with controversial beliefs and lifestyles has increased, which is a good thing, but that's only one thing. I know I'm making this room extremely uncomfortable. I hope it is making you extremely uncomfortable. That is where this work is situated. Look at this picture. Forget about the message. Look at this picture. This picture was taken by Danish Siddiqui, who is a world-renowned photographer. This picture is from the COVID times. And what you see is the harsh reality of the COVID-19. This is mass burning of dead bodies in New Delhi. One small virus threw us off in all the ways possible, financially, health-wise, and all the aspects. And that was not so gentle reminder of this African wisdom. I am because we are. Ubuntu. We are so all deeply interconnected that there is no I possible in our extremely hyper-connected world today. There's no place for I. Yes, I'm not talking about autonomy. Yes, individual autonomy is extremely important, but there is no I in the whole world scenario. We can't afford to just think about us as an individual. We are us as an individual, as a part of a big hyper-connected system. And this picture is a not so gentle reminder of that. With this, we are left with two choices. Either be indifferent to our realities or have compassion and approach the situations with compassion. So, putting all of this thinking into a conceptual framework, this is a framework I developed. I call it the 3Cs framework. Competence in action. Yes, competence is extremely important. It does matter how good of an essay you can write. It is important it is important that you provide a coherent narrative of your own work. Yes, the competence is extremely important. So it's commitment to task, the motivation to get something done. Without these two C's, you cannot succeed in your life. But without that third C, we cannot exist. The concern for others. It's the ability and attitude to understand the needs and challenges of others, to relate with them, and to develop a willingness to act. The three C's. So I'll give you a brief second to think about where you stand on these three C's. How competent do you feel you are? How committed to a task do you feel you are? And how much concern do you have? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10. And is there an area for you to work on? Then what is concern for others? It's collectively, we refer to a concern for other human beings, our human societies, and the mother nature. It involves perceiving the needs of and challenges of others around us. It's very other focused. Developing a belongingness with them, experiencing an emotional urge to help them, and then cultivating motivation to act on that willingness to help. So as you can see, there is an affective component. The affective component is the feeling with another person component. There is a behavioral component. There is, oh, I only am concerned about you, but I won't do anything about it. Doesn't work. It doesn't help us. So there is a behavioral component to it. And then, of course, there is a cognitive dimension to it, where I'm putting myself in your shoes to understand what your needs are. So there is a cognitive, it's thinking with another person part of this concern for others. So that is why today I'm not only focusing on compassion, but I'm focusing on all three dimensions. And compassion also has these several dimensions where you try to understand what the other person is going through, to understand that they are suffering, then connecting with them through that common experience of suffering, and then finding the willingness, the urge, the motivation, the will, the drive to help alleviate their suffering. That's what compassion is. And I dare I say, compassion is a part of this broader construct of concern for others, along with empathy and pro-social behavior. So compassion, empathy, and pro-social behavior, they're a close cluster of constructs that together, broadly, more generally, can be captured through this higher order construct called concern for others. Now, this is all good, nice for theory, but is there any empirical evidence of this? I mean, I can come up with any theory and you can come up with any theory, but does it make sense? Does data support the theory? We'll get into that in my next part. But quickly, a reminder, probably this audience doesn't need it, but empathy is an individual's ability to mirror the emotions and take the perspective of other beings around. So mirroring the emotions part is, like, oh, you are hurting, I'm hurting. You are very happy, I'm very happy. So shared laughter, shared tears, shared disgust, all of that is empathy. But that's the empathic concern part, the affective part of it. And taking the perspective is putting yourself in the shoes of another person. That's the perspective taking. That's the cognitive aspect of empathy. Then what is compassion? Compassion is the capacity to perceive and desire to alleviate the suffering of others. Compassion is very much focused on the suffering of others. It is therefore very much other-centric. And it is possible. What is different from empathy is, for empathy, it's important for you to think and feel together. But if I say I understand what happens to a woman or what a woman goes through when she is menstruating, do you think I, as a male, can take that perspective? Or can I take the perspective of a woman who feels harassment at her workplace? I cannot. So can I empathize? It's very hard to take that perspective. I can try to put myself in her shoes, but it is extremely difficult for me to do that. There are limitations to my empathy. But compassion acknowledges that the person is suffering. And then you acknowledge that suffering. You find other experiences of suffering to connect with their suffering. And then you feel the need, the desire to alleviate their suffering. It involves three things: mindfulness, mindful attention to others' suffering. That's where the mindfulness part comes into play. Then the common humanity piece, acknowledging that this is a common shared human experience of suffering, and it's unpleasant always. And then acting with kindness. That's compassion. And of course, there are overlaps between empathy and compassion, but there are two different ideas. In COVID times, when a neighbor's relative died and there were no deaths in your family, it was very hard for you to understand what it meant to lose a person to COVID. But you were still able to help them because you realized they were in need of things. They were suffering, they were hurting, right? They were grieving. And then pro-social behavior is that last very important part, a broad range of actions intended to benefit other people, right? Cooperating, sharing, helping, comforting, all of these. So as you will see, there are a lot of conceptual overlaps. There is some pro-social behavior expected in compassion, but maybe not. Some people say you don't need to act. Compassion is just motivation. Then empathy has that empathic concern part, which greatly overlaps with compassion. So as you can see, there are a lot of overlaps. So can we empirically validate this? Which brings me to the measurement piece. And the broad question is, how can concern for others
Pros.
Okay.
Bummer. Maybe he'll unfreeze. I think it's his end.
Yeah,
There's nothing we can do.
no. He needs to,
Log in again, you
yeah.
think?
I'm gonna pause the recording.
Okay.
Unexpected out. And so I'm using my mobile's hotspot, and I don't know how well we can do this, but I'm so sorry. This is extremely unexpected.
Can you still share?
But
There we go.
There we go.
I will keep my camera off if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so starting where we left, how can we measure concern for others? And we can't do an intervention if we can't measure the construct. So this is my understanding. So I just gave you my conceptual idea, and then I put it to a statistical test. Because for others is a second order, higher order factor that probably has affective, cognitive, and behavioral dimensions. I'm using a lot of hand gestures, so I'm going to try and keep my video on. So affective, behavior, and cognitive, the A, B, C factor structure, and then different items measuring those three uh, uh, factors that are in a way they're latent factors indicative of the general concern for others. Okay, so I did this work in India and the US. Drew items from several popular empathy, compassion, and pro-social behavior self-rating questionnaires. For example, interpersonal reactivity index or the compassion scale from NAS and SAC, pro-socialness scale. The interesting part about it is the IRI was developed in the US, compassion scale was developed in Turkey, and the pro-socialness scale was developed in Italy. So there were 39 total items that I started with. And then affective dimension, out of these 39 items, 12 items focused on the affective dimension, namely empathic and compassionate concern. There were 14 items that focused on the behavioral aspect. There was some action in it. And I'm going to show you those items. And then there were 10 items that focused on the cognitive part of it, mainly perspective taking. So look at the perspective taking items. When I am upset at someone, I usually try to put myself in their shoes, a very classic perspective taking activity, right? Look at the empathic concern item. Sometimes I don't feel very sorry for others when they're having problems. So that's lack of concern for others, right? It's a negatively coded item. Similarly, if you look at the compassion scale, it has, I feel sorry when bad things happen to people. That's concern. I feel sorry for patients who are suffering. That's concern. But the affective part of it. So I looked at each of these items and categorized them as either affective, behavioral, or cognitive. Look at these. From team compassion scale, I try to help people. Try to help people. When crying child, I try to help him or her. That's behavior. So that was categorized in the second factor, the behavioral factor. And then I try to understand what sufferer feels. I try to put myself in the shoes of sufferers. Do you hear me? Uh, do you hear me?
Kind of freezing up though.
Yep. The internet is giving me a hard time.
Yeah, you might need to leave your camera off.
Yep. Okay, perfect. But I think so basically you get the idea, right? There are three scales. I looked at all those 39 items. I classified them into A, B, and C, that is affective, behavior, and cognitive. And then there were also potentially misfit items that were thrown out. I find peace when I try to help sufferers. I don't know where to categorize it. I find peace. That's like an after effect, aftertaste of sorts. And then even in the pro-socialness scale, the scale that kind of says they're about pro-socialness, have some potential misfits and have empathy items straight away. I intensely feel what others feel. There is nothing pro-social. It is not pro-social behavior. I intensely feel it's still at the feeling level. So there was some So this seemed messy, and how can we clean it up? So that's where I jumped in, cleaned it up in A, B, and C categories, and came up with this model: concern for others, affect, behavior, and cognition, and ran it with two groups of people, about 450 US people, representative sample, about 400 people in India, ran CFA, which is confirmatory factor analysis, and there were a bunch of these measures that I used for validity purposes, right? Look at this. Bottom line, you don't need to look at the numbers or such. If you believe me, I was able to weed out some of the non-functioning items across the samples and able to shorten the scale to 21 items, and the model fit well. So it had an acceptable model fit, also balanced factor loadings across 3 constructs. What does it mean? It just means that my data supported my theory. And these are some more numbers to say the same thing, but in a more complex and scholarly way. Then I said, okay, can we shorten the scale from 21 items to something, I mean, to fewer items? And then I thought, how about we get it down to 12 items, 4 items per dimension. And again, there were factor loading criteria and there was item diversity criteria. I didn't want to uh, uh, um, compromise on the quality, but I did not also want to get rid of diversity. I wanted more diverse items. Ran the model again, chose a bunch of tried a bunch of combinations, came to a good combination that fits well, has balanced factor loadings, and then 12 item. In conclusion, the 12 item version of this scale now works very well, and we have evidence that it works with Indian adults and it works with the US adults, which are 2 different cultures in some ways. These are some more fancy numbers from confirmatory factor analysis that say the same thing. Let's look at the reliability evidence. Quite solid reliability evidence. The threshold is usually 0.7. So all the numbers are above 0.7, which tells us that 21 item scale and the 12 item scale, both of them do work well. Now, are you interested in knowing what happened to the validity? We found a very good validity evidence. It, as expected, positively correlated with compassion for others, compassionate love, compassion for other living beings. I told you compassion was very relevant to this idea of concern for others. Look at those correlations. Those are very high. And then gratitude, positive relationships with others, intellectual humility, life satisfaction, connectedness with others, all important qualities in our life. They're related to concern for others. As you can expect, negatively, social dominance orientation, the urge to dominate groups, other groups that groups that are not like you, negative correlation. Dark personality traits, Machiavellianism, sadism, negative relation. However, this was surprising. A weak and positive correlation with narcissism. So concern and narcissism go hand in hand, weakly, but in the same direction, which was surprising. So narcissists might say they have concern for others. This is all self-reported data. And it did not correlate whatsoever with psychopathy, which is beyond my thinking. Because psychopathy is about unnecessary risk-taking, harming others, and there is no correlation. Maybe it's about the measurement that I used in this study. So I might follow this up with another psychopathy measure and see if really there is no connection there. As you can expect, only a weak correlation with self-compassion. So concern for others and self-compassion are 2 different ideas altogether. And social desirability effect, it's somewhat there. Personality-wise, agreeableness, openness, and openness to others, positively correlated. Yes, if you are agreeable. And that makes sense because agreeableness is about being tuned to other people's needs. And then no or weak correlations with other personality traits. Extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness. Look at this very important graph. What does this graph tell you? So 0 means there is no difference across groups. Okay, look at the 0 line here. That means there's no significant difference. So these two, no significant difference. And then these two, you see 3 stars here, so they're significantly different. What is different? So gender. So female participants reported greater concern for others than male participants. And we see that consistently in our daily lives as well as in a lot of psychology literature. Indian participants, culture, Indian participants versus the US participants. Indian participants do report a significantly greater concern for others. And that does make sense because this is probably a difference between an individualistic culture and a collectivistic culture. However, look at the age and socioeconomic status. The betas here are about 0, which means with age or with how much money you have or what status you have in society, probably your concern for others has no relationship with it, which is contrary to some of the research that has been done in this area. So we need to follow up with these findings. So can this measure predict qualities such as depression, anxiety, and stuff like that? Can we replicate these findings across different groups, such as ages and abilities and stuff like that? So these are some future research questions. Now I'm aware that I have about 6 minutes, but we lost some of my minutes in the technical stuff. So
You can talk longer if you want. I mean, if you need to, because it's
okay. I have one important study to share, which is where I take off my psychometrician hat and put on my educationist hat and talk about the last part, development. Can concern for others be developed, especially in adolescents? And I focused on adolescents with intellectual gifts. And why? What is so special about adolescents with intellectual gifts? Is because we know some of them will go on to take up the leadership roles. I don't want to name names, but if you go on Twitter, you'll see a lot of toxicity from a lot of political leaders, from a lot of tech leaders. I'm in the Bay Area here. We all are in this Bay Area. We see this stupidity around us all the time, right? And these are probably extremely competent people. These are probably extremely committed people, maybe top 1%, top 0.5% of intellectual band, right? And then highest of the highest dedication to their work. But why are they still contributing to a lot of mess in the world? And probably the answer is the lack of concern. So can we do this work earlier in life, middle school? So that's my focus. Why? Because empathy, compassion, pro-social behavior are all malleable, and adolescence is probably the most opportune time for intervention because that's where the identity development is happening. That's where adolescents are seeking answers to several questions about their own self and people around them and a lot of that. So, and then several of these interventions have focused on, for example, empathy interventions focus on interpersonal accuracy. Can you name the emotions the other people are experiencing, perspective taking, active listening, and stuff like that. Compassion, mindfulness, Dr. Wallace focuses on mindfulness, right? Meditation on kindness and common humanity, and reflections and gratitude and interconnectedness. We all focused on interconnectedness a lot at the beginning of this talk. And pro-social behavior interventions, they focus on empathy and compassion, no doubt, because empathy and compassion are the biggest predictors of pro-social behavior. Then gratitude and meditation again, and forgiveness. So these are the interventions that people have tried. So I pulled from this literature to develop one of my own interventions called Samvedana, which is a Sanskrit word for concern for others, and just tried to see if the self-reported concern for others changes over time of adolescents' participation in the intervention. And then what were their experiences like? And I tell you, there were some of those interviews with kids where I've cried with them when they've shared their experiences of implementing concern for others in their lives. So are you interested in understanding more about the intervention? Do you want to see what the intervention was about? So the first 3 sessions, we focused on understanding emotions. See, interpersonal accuracy, understanding emotions. We need to first at least understand the emotions and the broad range of emotions. then perspective taking, communicating with empathy. Then the three sessions after that, they focused exclusively on compassion, mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. And the last four focused on gratitude and interconnectedness. We also organized a field visit. And then the final session was to wrap it up all together, tie the knots, and come up with an action plan. So it was a 3-month intervention. This was a weekly session, 70 minutes. So it would start with some small talk, some recap of the previous session, then some meditation. So for the first 3 weeks, we just focused on breath-focused meditation. In the next 3 weeks, we focused on compassion meditation because the theme was compassion. And for the last 4 sessions, we focused on loving kindness meditation. Then after a brief meditation, a 5-minute meditation, we would focus on we would have a starter activity, topic introduction, then a main activity, main topic, topic closure, home practice, and we would finish with a comic strip and a wellness prayer to close the session of 70 minutes. In total, we conducted several planning meetings and stuff like that, big numbers, a lot of work. Look at this first, you might recall the first, you might recognize the first image. It's from Inside Out. Emotions. The second session on perspective taking, that's trigger, emotion, pause. Think why the other person is acting in ways they're acting, and then take the action instead of just reacting to an emotion. That's perspective taking. Then all that we share, that was the session on common humanity. And then there was a session on I care instead of I don't care. That's kindness. I used a convergent, mixed methods, community-based, participatory research, all big words. You can ignore them all. Basically, I work with a bunch of teachers to develop a 10-week intervention. 130 participants from 2 sites in India participated in this study. There were 2 groups, randomly assigned treatment group and a delayed treatment group. And we collected a bunch of quantitative surveys and then ran a bunch of analysis on it, and then qualitative interviews, journal entries, observations, and then some thematic analysis of those data to come up with an integrated interpretation of the data. That's what a mixed method study means. You look at quantitative, you look at qualitative, and you come to an integrated interpretation. So focus on the green parts, pre to post, T1 to T3, time 1 to time 3. That's the treatment group getting the intervention, and then the delayed treatment group getting the intervention. You can't really have experimental conditions in schools because you cannot not give some students an important intervention, right? So you have to give them a delayed treatment, which is one of the key limitations. Interested in learning about the findings? Look at these graphs. These are all time series graphs, okay? So concern on y-axis here, concern on y-axis, and this is time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? Look at the treatment group, the first group. Let's call them group 1. Group 1 showed an overall moderate to large significant increase over time. You look at this graph, you'll see there is some increase, then some decrease, but then again, increase over time. You see this graph. Same thing with the delayed treatment group or the group 2. And if you look at the partial eta square, this is 0.13, this is 0.10. So a bigger effect for the second group, which means overall, the big finding is this intervention might have worked. And when we're talking about time 1 to time 3, that's 3 months. Time 3 to time 5, that's another 3 months. And then 6 is after 3 months. So this timeline is 9 months timeline. Now look at individual variables. If you're interested in A, B, and C, smallest change in affect, feeling with another person. Small to moderate changes in self-reported behavior. And the biggest changes, the largest changes were in the cognitive part. So probably it is easier to teach perspective taking skills. It is relatively more difficult to bring about any behavioral change. And it's probably the hardest to bring about an affective change. That is what these numbers are telling us. And then I did something magical, and I call it magical because that gave me a very good insight into what's happening. I divided this data set into 3 groups. The average students, not average cognitively, average concern for others in this group. These are all the students taken together, average group. And then this is the highly concerned group. 1 standard deviation above the average, and that is low concern for others group at the baseline, before even before the intervention began. And look at this graph. You can see 3 clear lines, right? Those who were at the top continued to be on the top. So probably the intervention was not even needed for them. They continued to be highly concerned for others. The average group showed some growth over time, right? And look at this low group. Those who reported the lowest concern for others at the beginning of the intervention grew the most. And they also came closer to where the other 2 groups were. Meaning, yes, there might be people out there who have low concern for others without any intervention. But with an intervention, they can potentially go up, which means maybe the intervention worked the most for people who needed it the most. And that is the best possible news. And that's why I call it magical. Not the intervention, but this analysis, this insight. So if you work with data that have different levels of people, maybe it might help for you to separate them into different groups where this began, and then test where your intervention helped them. So this gave me a very positive idea quantitatively, which was also reassured by the qualitative results. You look at these 3 yellow highlighted things. These were key outcomes: emotion regulation, mindful engagement, responsible communication, relationship building, and kindness and gratitude kept coming in these interviews. I conducted 17 interviews, long interviews with these adolescents. And I'm not going to bore you with details, but let's look at only 3 quotes. The first one: we don't usually care. This is a 7th standard, a middle grade student saying, we don't usually care a lot about the impact of our words and behavior on others. And that's true, right? And I started thinking about others through meditation. Maybe Dr. Wallace is happy reading this quote. Meditation can help adolescents think about their impact of words on others. Look at the second theme. I've started to care about others. Recently, a friend shared her family issues with me, and I responded with, "You don't worry, everything will be all right." I had never said something like this before. This is a 13-year-old girl. And at that age, this is pretty important. Look at the last one. I realized we must never just think about ourselves, but also about others. Earlier, I used to grab opportunities for myself at the expense of others. Now I share them with others. Another 13-year-old boy this time sharing the story. So I put them together into a mixed methods integration, and you can see the chart: affect, behavior, cognition. These are the quantitative graphs that I was talking about, right? Small changes in affect, small to moderate change in behavior, and significant moderate change in cognition, right? And qualitative themes were also nicely overlapped with these 3: affect, behavior, and cognition. And therefore, there was a lot of confirmation, especially with behavior and cognition. There was a lot of confirmation where the quantitative and qualitative data both said the same thing. With affect, the affective part, the empathic concern part, although the qualitative data gave us a lot of positive support, the quantitative data only showed a marginal significance with a small effect. So there was a discordance, and this needs to be tested further. But my hunch is that it is hard to measure affect in general, and the qualitative interviews are a better source of such information. So a more rigorous experiment in the future with a bigger sample size, maybe the same intervention with similar ages, but not just highly intellectual students, but heterogeneous ability groups, maybe different ages, maybe different cultural groups, and more importantly, how long can the effect sustain? We don't know about that yet. We know about the 9-month period, but we don't know about how long after that the effect sustained. So to bring it back home, this is where we started: competence, commitment, and concern, 3 C's. And let me close this talk with a quote from an Indian monk, Swami Vivekananda, a philosopher, a wonderful philosopher, who said in Sanskrit, Atmano mokshartham jagat hitaya cha. Atmano is for one's salvation. Atmano mokshartham. Moksha is salvation, for one's salvation. And Jagat Hitaya. Jagat is world. Hitaya is the welfare, progress, and stability of the society and world community. I think we need education that helps us helps one in their own salvation and welfare, progress, and stability of the society and the world community. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I really appreciated your patience.
That was a great talk. That was a great talk. We have time for questions. Okay.
Thank you so much. And this was really fascinating. I have a question about the measure and the divergent validity analyses. Have you thought to do additional analyses to try to differentiate concern for others and empathy from emotions that kind of mask as compassion and empathy, such as sympathy and pity?
That's a great question. I've not done that. Although one of my dissertation committee members did ask me this question, like, what is different about pity and feeling sorry for someone, right? Compared to feeling compassion. So I think with pity, there is self-distancing. There is you separate yourself from the other person. There is also power that is involved. I feel pity for someone, meaning I give myself so much importance and power. I feel I'm bigger and I'm higher than you. So conceptually, they are different things, but empirically, I do not have any evidence to validate my hunch. So that is a future direction, but that's a great point.
But we're losing students left and right. Any other questions? They got to rush off to their next class.
I don't blame them.
Well, this was great. This is great. I really want to get a copy of this research that you published. Really wonderful. Thanks for this talk, Aakash.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. And I'm so sorry for all the technological.
No, that's no problem. That's no problem. It was wonderful. I really liked it. And you published these articles? Did you publish these studies?
In the process. So I've published a couple of book chapters and practice pieces on these, and the empirical work will be out soon.
Can you send me the links for those book chapters, or?
I will. I will send. Yes.
Yeah. No, I really like it a lot. It's really helpful to me. Yeah. Because in my research, I'm looking at the connections between mindfulness and the caregiving behavior system. And I am proposing that mindfulness is a quality of awareness that emerges when that system is engaged. So I'd like to look at your model, so.
Thank you. Thank you. I will share some stuff with you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.